All right, everyone. It's now 4 o'clock. I appreciate your attendance here for this meeting. I know it is Martin Luther King Day, but we appreciate your attendance in really our kickoff outreach efforts for looking at and considering regulations for short-term rentals for the city of Dana Point. Just to let you know, kind of first things, the meeting is recorded. So we'll be using it to take minutes and, if necessary, reference back. So we'll be part of the public record. And there will be opportunities for you to speak. Right now you're muted. We do have a little bit of a presentation, and then there will be opportunities to speak on some key items that we're obviously looking for your feedback for. And then there will be question and answers at the end. So in the chat box when we're at that particular topic, if you'd like to speak, just make a note in there. I think that there is also a raise hand feature. So either of those, and we will make sure to get to you at that appropriate time. So with that, let's see. With that, I'll hand it over to Eric for introduction, or Brenda to just kick off the meeting, and I'll be sharing my screen to show you the slides for the presentation.
Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and ask Eric Nelson, Plan Commissioner, to as a member of the subcommittee to run the meeting. Thank you.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name, first of all, let me welcome you to the stakeholder meeting. And I want to express on behalf of the city of Dana Point, our appreciation for all of your attendance today and for your time and energy that you'll put into your feedback throughout this process. As Brenda mentioned, my name is Eric Nelson. I serve as the vice chair of the Dana Point Planning Commission and also on this subcommittee. But before we get rolling, I do want to take a minute to introduce our subcommittee, and starting with Planning Commissioner Roy Donor, as well as Community Development Director Brenda Wisniewski, Senior Planner John Chiampa, and Community Development Manager Jeff Rossler. And this is the group that has been working collectively since the formation of this committee at trying to work with an outreach plan and communicate with all the various stakeholders, you being just one group of stakeholders. John did cover the housekeeping items as far as muting your mics and using your reaction button, like raising your hand. But since we have a small group today, I thought it'd be good to take a quick second. If I could just call on your name and have you introduce yourself and tell us the general location of your STR, where you live in the city, if you live in the city, and any other detail that you think is important. So I'll just start on my screen with William, and I apologize if I get this wrong, Gaeta. And you have to unmute your mic before you speak. John, can you unmute him?
Yeah, give me 1 second here. Let's see. There we go.
Okay, William, I apologize.
Hi. So my name is William Gaeta. You can call me Bill, please. I guess I've owned a property on Violet Lantern for about 25 to 30 years. I was probably one of the very first people to sign up for the short-term rental system inside the city. I live in Mission Viejo. I spend as much time as possible in Dana Point, both in the property that I own there and any of the units when they're not being utilized. And also I'm an avid boater and have a boat in the marina. So I've been in and around Dana Point since the 70s. It's a beautiful city. And I'll just make one comment on short-term rentals. I remember when it first started, it's when we first started doing the Lantern District reorganization or whatever, rejuvenation. And I remember thinking, it's rare that you pay taxes for something and you see the benefit. And I remember distinctly making a comment to the team at the city at that time saying, I'm really happy with what you've done downtown, I guess our taxes are finally going to a good use. So that's the spirit, the way I look at it, and I hope it continues that way.
Great, thank you, Bill. Next, Dana Sumsell. And you need to unmute.
John, maybe you can unmute everybody while
Yeah.
we're doing the introductions.
My name is Dana, and my property's in the Lantern District. I did the short-term rentals, I think it was about 13 years. So it was a couple of years before the licensing process had started. And I'm currently living there, so I'm not renting it out, but I still have my permit current. So I may change that in the next year or so. I'm just not sure yet. But
Great, well, thank you for being here,
Mom,
Dana.
I grew up here, so I'm very familiar with the area and the building department and the zoning and planning.
Great, well, thank you.
Mhm.
George, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, good. My name is George Ray. I have three small short-term rentals, and I live in Capo Beach, just off of Camino Estrella. I've owned the properties actually since 1988. And I actually have, they are two duplexes, of which we have three of them we've converted with licenses for Airbnbs. We live in one of the units. I've lived in Capo Beach since 1999 and have lived in this unit this property since 2013. I converted the first unit in 2014 or 15 and converted the other two shortly thereafter. So that's my story. I've been in the real estate business actually as basically a site locator for major corporations, i.e. Lucky Stores and Home Depot, to name a couple. And my main experience is in retail development, but have a pretty good entitlement background as well. And titled as a consultant, it looks like they haven't got too far with it. The Gabay property at Golden Lantern and PCH, the residential unit. I was the person who handled the entitlements for them. That's my story.
Great, well, thank you, George. Next up, we've got Tiffany Coles.
Hi, I'm Tiffany. I live in Rancho Cucamonga, but we co-own a little condo at Ritz Point that was grandfathered in. And then we have this house that I'm at that I split my time between here and Rancho, which is in the Lantern District. We don't have a permit on this one, so we only do longer rentals. Yeah, I own Airbnbs in Palm Springs, La Quinta, and Nashville, and one in Orlando. So I'm super familiar. And it's kind of the way that we live our lives now. And so I love the idea of doing it legally and helping the city. And I'm all for that.
Great, well, thank you very much. Let's see, next up, Deanna Slocum.
Hi, sorry I'm late. A few of us, for some reason, we couldn't find the link, so we're all scrambling to send each other the Zoom link. But I am Deanna Slocum. I've been involved with short-term rentals in Dana Point since 2016, when we had a successful passage of the ordinance and then was subsequently pulled back with a referendum from the opposing side. I own one home in Dana Point that I do perform short-term rentals with. And it is in the Lantern District, and it's a single family home, and my neighbors are all wonderful, and it's been going quite well for several years now. Never had any complaints, never had any issues.
Thank you. Next up, we've got Nancy Warner.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, we have owned a duplex on Diana Drive in Dana Point since 2009, and we bought this property together with our daughter, who could not afford to buy a home on her own in Dana Point right out of school. And so she started off living there, and then we very soon after that, converted it to legal short-term rentals for A and B. And so both A and B have been short-term rentals. We've had excellent success record. Not one complaint has ever been filed against us. We have very, very strict rules. And most of the rules that we have would eliminate a lot of the things on your agenda that are problems, you know, trash, parking, noise. We have a very strict policy. We do not allow any events, parties, and our guests, this sounds kind of nasty, but it's the way we do it. They are not even allowed to have visitors. It's only the people on that contract that I have everybody sign and list their names and make them vow that that's it. And with that in mind, then you really have fewer parking issues than you would with the lease tenant. And the same thing with the trash. The trash and the parking and the noise, I think, really are generated from a lot of VRBOs or short-term rentals where they don't have any maximum capacity right in their agreement. And I think that that's really, really important. And so we've stuck to that. We have we have a vacation rental that's a legal one also in Carlsbad, and we do the same thing there. And that has always, it's never had a problem with that either. And at the beach in Carlsbad, and just like in the Lantern District, parking is a big issue. So, you know, that's just something that we found that has worked well for us. And all our neighbors have been very, very supportive. The street that we are on is kind of mixed use. We have single family homes, we have apartments and condos and a little bit of everything. But it's worked out very well, and we've appreciated the city working with us and trying to get some of these, you know, mandates through. And I certainly hope that they will, you know, do that as opposed to just outlawing them because of a few of bad actors. So that's it.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate all of your information and commentary. Jeff Stanford. Jeff, you there?
That he was trying to get his laptop up or something.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on. And if he gets on, we'll let him introduce himself. Jason Husky, are you there?
Yeah, hello everyone. This is Jason. I've had a condo in Monarch Hills since 2008, before the permitting process. So we've had almost 13 years now of no complaints, no neighbor complaints, just a bunch of happy families that have visited over the years.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And I think that concludes Jeff's still getting his computer set up. So I'm going to keep moving along here because we do have a hard stop at 5:30 tonight, and we do have a lot to cover and do want to also, you know, do some Q&A here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Brenda Wisniewski, who's going to talk a little bit about the history. I'm guessing based on the conversations we've heard so far, most of you have that history. But for, you know, sort of laying the groundwork of where we're headed, Brenda, I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you kind of give us a presentation.
Great, thank you. So I'm Brenda Wisniewski. I'm the Community Development Director for the city. So we, staff and I put together a presentation that I'm going to ask John Champa to go ahead and put up on the screen and share with you all. So go ahead and screen down to the relevant slides to the background, John. This is just the agenda that we're going over. So background, go ahead and tab down, John. So as you all know, as Eric pointed out, you all have a good understanding of where we've been as a city. The city's been trying to get an ordinance passed since 2016, but has been challenged based upon concerns of the community of whether or not these type of uses are compatible with the neighborhoods. But we also have a pulling factor of the California Coastal Commission, who is the regulatory authority for land uses in the city. The Coastal Commission sees short-term rentals as improving coastal access, which is in accordance with the California Coastal Act. So the City Council has allowed short-term rentals, even though the ordinance was not passed. And basically, as you all know, those were grandfathered since 2016. And John, if you can go on to the next slide, since 2016, the city has been working on an ordinance, actually. There was a City Council subcommittee that was formed in 2018, and they did some outreach and were reaching out to other communities to find out what they were doing. 2 surveys have been conducted over the past few years. One was somewhat of an informal survey. One was a very statistically accurate survey. If you're interested in the results of those, that it is on our website. And then the next slide, basically to tell you where we're at right now. So they mentioned the California Coastal Commission is a strong entity in what we do with our short-term rentals. And in talking with the coastal staff, what they suggested that we do is develop a pilot program. And the reason for doing that is it would allow us to basically test the waters with our community, put together a program that we could develop based on input from our community members, and have the flexibility to modify that program over the 3-year program to ensure that it reflects what we really want our community to have. So that's what we're developing right now. If you show the next slide, John, the City Council in July of last year directed us to work with the Planning Commission and really focus on not only trying to get out to the community and speak directly with people like you, but also develop the program. And they directed staff to ensure that the program included all short-term rental types. I mean, not just the homestays where people basically live in the unit, but also the traditional short-term rentals. And then the second piece of that is to ensure that whatever short-term rentals we have in our community, that we have some strong enforcement mechanisms. So that's why today's meeting is really focused on those enforcement tools. And that's why I'm so glad that many of you already have experience in doing these type of uses. I think you can share with us some great ideas. So the next slide, John, is John's going to talk about kind of our general approach.
So the general approach is to essentially tackle this at 2 phases. One is to begin looking at the regulations that we have with the existing short-term rentals, to see, what can additional regulations that we can incorporate to, improve some of these concerns that the community has related to the operations of the short-term rentals, as well as just community compatibility. So with that is kind of grouped in terms of with phase 1, and the regulations and the modified regulations that we'll be looking at are really focused on what the community has voiced their concerns related to, really parking, noise, and trash. In phase 2, once we complete phase 1, we'll then transition to that along with a similar public outreach process with stakeholder groups to look at the development of the pilot program and look at additional regulations and best management practices that we can incorporate into these potentially new permits to ensure that they are, as stated, compatible with the neighborhood. So as part of that process, so will be the public outreach through a number of different methods, stakeholder groups, as well as social media and planning commission workshops to ensure that we get we hear all the voices from all the stakeholder groups. And then last, as Brenda said, the pilot program will allow some flexibility in case we need to refine some of those regulations to really through that 3-year period ensure that we're really happy with the final product of the program and can move forward to incorporate it into our zoning ordinance. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to our code enforcement or community development manager, Jeff Rossler, and he'll be going through and over some of the code enforcement statistics that he's prepared.
So I want to start off by looking at the kind of general outlay of the town and where your guys' existing permits are. And so you can see this slide here has the voting districts of Dana Point. So the town is split into 5 voting districts. So you'll see that all 5 voting districts are up there, and you'll see where the concentration of short-term rental permits already are. So we have about, I think, 142 permits as of today. And you guys all know this, but there's a large concentration on Beach Road in Capitol Beach, the Lantern District, and some up there in voting District 3. There's also a big cluster up in Corniche HOA as well. And so here it just breaks it down a little bit. You can see that, that blue is District 5 there. So Capitol Beach and Beach Road, over 28% of the homes in our permit system are on Beach Road right now. And the other large district, as stated, was the Lantern District with 31%. And then the Bible Belt area has about 20% of our permits.
Can you go back to the map just a second, just so I can get a view?
Sure. And Jeff, all these graphs and details exist on our website now. We just updated our website. So you can actually look at this more closely, and then you can touch on an interactive link that'll take you to the actual map, and you can play around with it and get more data that way.
Thanks. That's good. Go ahead.
So as you guys know, if you don't renew your permits or you sell the house, that the permits then no longer cease to exist. So starting in 2016, there was about 165 permits. Through the years, there's been an attrition where we're down to about 142 permits now, as stated. TOT has gradually gone up, even though the number of permits has gone down. TOT has increased throughout the years. And I think, this is just the popularity of Airbnbs, short-term rentals, and Dana Point itself. So we want to talk a little bit about enforcement. I really want to point out that we do a lot of code enforcement cases, but most of our efforts here, you can see is that light blue, and that's advertising for short-term rentals without a permit. And so you guys know that the city has a fairly robust system to go after those who don't have permits and make sure that they stop their short-term rental operations. So we've had up to 120 code cases in a single year for those short-term rentals without permits. On the other hand, if you have a nuisance code case at the permitted STRs, you can see that the number of actual cases there is fairly low. So I want to jump into some of the more details on those nuisance related cases, if I could, in the next slide. And you can see that in 2020, we have the host compliance based hotline where folks can call in. And you can see that in the most calls we have in a single month was in June, where we had 8 calls, dropping down to 2 in July and 5 in August. So your summer months are obviously a little bit bigger. And these are for calls that come in specifically about nuisance. And of those calls, there's 28 of them that code enforcement responded to. And we actually wrote 4 citations this past year for those nuisances. So all 4 were written for excessive noise. And we didn't write any for excessive music, for trash, for parking. Not that we didn't get calls, but everything was really for that noise. And then if you look down, this is something I think is pretty interesting. There was 144 properties that operated in 2020. The number of homes that had 0 citations was 142. So most of you guys out there are great operators. We don't have issues. There was 1 short-term rental that got 3 citations, and we spoke with the owner. And after, I think, June, we did not have any more problems with that home as well.
Jeff?
Yeah, go ahead.
Other than the nuisance calls, what is the procedure for determining your bar graph earlier, how many people are advertising without a permit? Is that, do you have to go chase after each advertisement?
We do. We have a third-party vendor that kind of scrubs the web and looks for those folks that are advertising without STRs. And they kind of keep a running list of those people who are operating. And then we'll send them letters, code enforcement, notice of violations, and/or citations. When I started in the division, we had about 40 of those homes in Dana Point. And I think I looked this week, we're down to 4 or 5. And so I think, this is a problem that doesn't really go away if you have a permitting program or not. This problem is going to be consistent and it's going to be out there. And so I'd like to separate those 2 from the nuisance calls to the actual STRs without permits. So these, as stated, all that information is on the website, and I am welcome, or I am open to take more questions and getting the numbers. There's other information we didn't share, but certainly here to answer questions when the time comes for it. Thank you.
So then I'll hop on, and kind of in our next segment of the discussion is to look at what our current key regulations are, as well as looking at possible modifications or additional regulations to deal with some of those concerns. As I mentioned before, these are all really focused around parking and noise and trash. So a lot of these regulations, we looked at not only what the city's current regulations are, but we also scoured other coastal cities and even non-coastal cities and what their regulations are for short-term rentals to give us some guidance in terms of what are cities incorporating and how, and do we feel like it would work for our community. So with that, the first regulation is for parking. So right now, our current regulation is that 1 parking space per bedroom is required with a maximum of 2 spaces. However, the director could approve additional parking spaces. Some of the additional regulations that we're considering, and we'd like to get your feedback on, is that it be designated a public nuisance if vehicles for the guests or visitors are parked on the street, as well as the parking owner would be, or the property owner would be responsible for paying any parking penalty fees. And that would be consistent with any other nuisance with the property owner does receive that nuisance violation. So with this, we'd like to open it up to any of you and get your opinions on some of these additional regulations, or if you feel like there would be other regulations that may be beneficial or that you have applied or seen in some of the other cities that you have your short-term rentals.
I have a question about the parking. I didn't see that on the list of issues that people had been cited for. Is there a reason why parking is the top area that we're focusing on?
With the surveys that the community surveys, this was really one of the 3 that was the most concern from the public.
So John, are we going through all the potential changes, and are we doing them by each section here?
We can field these for parking in particular, or we can field those towards the end in the Q&A section. Maybe it might be best to kind of let everyone digest this and then circle back towards the end of the meeting.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we get through all the potential regulatory changes before we in Q&A, for the fear that we might get stuck on one item and then not be able to get everything communicated.
Great.
Then before we move on, this is Jeff Stanford. If I could ask a question about the last bullet. Do you happen to know whether the property owner has any legal right to pass that charge along to the renter who might have already left?
We do not. So that would be something that would need to be evaluated if it's deemed that this is something that the city is looking to incorporate based on the input from the public process. So moving along, the next is noise. So our current regulations require the owner to ensure that the tenants aren't creating any unreasonable noise or disturbances or disorderly conduct, as well as taking any measures necessary to ensure that's the case and abate any disturbances. That would include calling the tenant, calling code enforcement, or the police department, possibly even evicting the tenant if that is escalates to that matter, or other methods deemed necessary. And then also taking action to prevent a reoccurrence within a 24-hour period. Additional regulations that we have come across that are under consideration are that the any amplified noise shouldn't be heard at the property line. That would be for any time of day, as well as non-amplified noise, including, talking, screaming, acoustic music, would not be heard from the property line between 10 p.m. and 10 a.m. Trash regulations. So that is the third item that was voiced as a concern via a lot of the public outreach or input that we've received. So the current regulations require that all trash be stored within the containers, and that the containers be taken out to the street 5 p.m. the day prior, and then 8 a.m. the day after be brought back in for collection, and that the owner is to provide sufficient trash collection. Some additional regulations that we have for consideration are that units with 3 bedrooms or more be required to provide 2 90-gallon waste containers, as well as designated a nuisance if trash containers are left out past the designated period, or if trash is outside of the designated containers. So, we, as discussed in the Q&A section, we'll be looking for any of your additional recommendations beyond that what we've identified here for parking, noise, and trash, to ensure that we are, addressing any potential issues. A number of you have said that you have short-term rental permits in other municipalities, and so maybe you have some regulations that you feel like would be really beneficial for the city to incorporate that haven't been mentioned or aren't already in our current zoning ordinance or municipal code. So with that, our next steps is we have additional stakeholder meetings this week. Those are for neighbors to short-term rentals and members of the community, as well as other community groups. And last group is spacing for the moment.
Management companies?
Management companies, yes. So there are a number of management companies that oversee many short-term rental properties. So we want to get their input as well. Then we'll have planning commission briefings, which will happen at the next planning commission meeting, which will be on the 25th. And then we'll have our planning commission public workshop, which will also be in a COVID safe format. It will be at the planning commission which will be held at the council chambers, but it'll also be available through the Microsoft Teams. So we will be rolling that out here shortly. So at this point in time, we'd like to receive any of your questions, comments related to any of the feedback or the regulations that we've identified, or any other items.
I have a question. This is Jeff Stanford. Regarding the additional stakeholder meetings, particularly the neighbors ones that you mentioned first, is there any chance post-meeting that we who rent out could get an idea of the angst or the anger that might have, could we get some kind of a summary of how the neighbors feel? This is our only chance of them talking to them personally.
Yeah, I know that I know we're recording everything, and I know you can jump in. I'm sure these will be available for anyone who wants to watch these meetings. Brenda.
So that's our intent, is to ensure that everything that is said here, or as we said, it's going to be recorded, and we have discussed posting the recordings of these meetings on our website. So for anyone to see that's interested. Also, Allison Peterson, as part of this Zoom meeting, she is taking some specific notes. And the purpose of her notes aren't really minutes, it's just really trying to capture the comments or recommendations that are coming from the stakeholders themselves. So two different ways you can hear from each of the groups. One is actually watching the video, the other is to read the notes from the meeting.
Are we allowed to know the names of the people who are participating in these meetings?
Yes, we will also, just like this meeting, we are documenting who has attended.
And how can we get that list of those names?
It'll be part of the meeting minutes following the meeting itself.
Okay.
Okay, we've got a hand up with Dana. Oh, there you go.
Hi. I just had a question about parking. My property was built in 1954 and it's a tiny house and we don't have a garage and we park on the street. And at one time, the code stated parking could be provided as originally, or parking as originally provided. So my house is so small, I usually have couples, so we don't normally have more than one car. So I don't know. That was just my personal concern, just because it's kind of a unique situation, I guess.
That's a good point, Dana. Hey, Jeff, can you, do we get complaints about parking? And if we do, what's the idea of the parking?
I mean, there's long-term residents with far more cars.
Maybe it's just perception that parking is an issue for short-term rentals. I don't know. Jeff, what do you have any-
Exactly. I guess that's my point, is like, why is short-term rentals all of a sudden, it's like, there's some long-term residents with a garage full of, storage and driveways that aren't being utilized. So, and if I had a driveway, you wouldn't be parking in front of my house. So I've contemplated building just a driveway.
I think that's why it's come up though as part of the survey instead of actually as being a citation, because I think if residents were surveyed, and especially if you live in the Lantern district like Grenada or some of the streets, and you're saying, oh my gosh, short-term rentals are coming to my neighborhood. Whoa, we don't have parking as it is, let alone if you add short-term rentals on top of that. So I think there does have to be that consideration that obviously the residents are going to be sensitive to it. So how do we reach that middle ground?
And it's a misconception too, because people are traveling, they're gonna have one rental car and they're probably gonna Uber to it. And I encourage people, well, I did when pre-COVID, a lot of people Ubered, to the house. And then, we live so close to town, they can walk, we have everything nearby.
I work for Uber. You should still encourage them to Uber.
Oh yeah.
We have a lot of COVID. We have a lot of COVID protection.
Yeah, we're living there right now. So, but I look, we'll see what happens the next year here.
I think though it's critically important that we make sure we have data of what's wrong and what is just a perception. And certainly parking is probably one of the bigger perceptions of there is no parking in the whole city. And don't blame it on the short-term rentals. That's a misnomer. I think that's something that you have to have real hard data on, just like the nuisances calls that you've had and the amount of citations written. You need hard data. I don't think it's good either for the city or our residents to come up with perceptions and then we act on perceptions alone. That would be a mistake.
Thank you. Yeah.
So the data's there, and the data states that we didn't have any complaints for parking over the past year. I do know in the past we've had a handful of cases where there has been a house that's rented for an STR, and they have brought their guests and their family and their friends over, and parking has been an issue, and code enforcement has gone out there. And you guys all know that you have a maximum number of people who can stay overnight at the house. If those cars don't line up with that maximum number, then there's an issue. We have, however, never written a citation for that issue, but we have received complaints, gone out and talked to the tenants, the owners, and been able to resolve it fairly quickly.
Well, those are the metrics that you need to keep. And unfortunately, maybe you do need to write those citations so we can definitively look at, is there a problem? Is it documented? And how do we resolve the problem?
And where? I bet there are different areas. We live in my little unit specifically off of Caiverano. It's the Poke restaurant that dominates the parking through lunch hour. I mean, there's not a space around. And after that, it's fairly easy. I have parking for all our tenants, so it's not really a problem. But certain areas may have a problem, maybe in the Lantern district and maybe on Beach Road. I would assume those bigger units would have propensity to have more units. So I think it may be localized at different areas.
Great.
I have the same.
Raising her hand. Did you want to jump in?
Like I said, I own short-term rentals in different parts of California and different states too. And so I've really seen the way a lot of different places do everything from like super regulation in Palm Springs to minimal regulation in Nashville. And I personally feel that regulation creates a better situation for everybody, the neighborhood and the owners, the ones that follow it. And so like in Palm Springs, I do think they're doing something right. They do require walk-up trash service if you have a short-term rental. That means you pay the city extra. They come up and get your trash cans, they empty the trash and they pull them away. And that means that, you know, the few absentee owners who don't do anything about it don't have their trash cans out all the time. And I think that's really something that's implemented. They implemented it now in La Quinta. They're starting to, and I think it's something that could maybe cure the neighbors' worries about the trash, because they hate the trash cans being out all the time. And some owners just leave them out all the time. And I guess that's the issue. And then the parking situation, being in the Lantern District, I do see how it's tight, but Palm Springs, same thing. If you have a garage, you have to tell the guests that's their first parking spot. And if they have a second parking spot, it has to be the driveway. They cannot park on the street, and that is regulated in Palm Springs. And at first I thought this is crazy, but it really does work. So obviously people without garages, they should be allotted street spaces, but sometimes people will just take the street space rather than take the driveway. So I think little rules like that could maybe appease everybody, the neighbors, and work for the owners as well.
Great feedback. I've never heard of the walk-up trash. That's
I have it here now in Dana Point.
Yeah, it's.
I bought it. I got it here. It's only $8 a month extra, I think, here.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
So that is
it's
a
really
service
inexpensive.
CCNR does, or CRNR.
Yeah. Although we've been here for like a while and they have yet to actually bring them back up unless we call. But I think it's just because not that many people use it. But I bet if it's something more regular, they would probably be more used to like figuring out which houses use it. But I think it was only $8 extra a month to have the walk-up service here.
Great. Thank you.
Tiffany, I'm in Rancho Mirage right now. That's where I have a second home.
Oh,
And
okay, yeah.
We don't have short-term rentals. They just actually buy, the city council just prohibited it across the city. But they do have, when they did have them, and we have a permit program here, there was a very restrictive noise ordinance. You had to be a certain decibels that were identified, and that over a certain decibel level, that's when you would get your citation. Does Palm Springs have that too? Because the noise
have a zero noise allowance. No music and no voices can be heard from the property. It's very strict, very strict.
No outdoor music at all.
No outdoor music ever. And if they can hear you outside of the property lines, they can cite you. So like if kids are screaming in the pool, they can cite you. I don't think that's done that often because I don't think the neighbors complain about like kids swimming in the pool.
They do in Rancho Mirage, and they would in Dana Point. And that's what worries me is that this Dana Point, being that we're on top of each other, we're so close together. I had a neighbor who was awful, and that's why I'm going to look at your neighbors list, because he's no longer around. He's a long-term renter. He was horrible, and he hated short-term renters and rentals. And so he did nothing but harass, and he kept calling the lines. Nothing was ever substantiated. But if somebody spoke in my house, he would call the hotline. And so that's my question, is if we've got that, if we don't have a decibel number, we don't have any sort of way to distinguish what's a problematic noise and what's just everyday talking, because the houses are so close together. How are we going to fight against those or guard against those malicious or nefarious complaints?
La Quinta does more of like a time restriction, and I think that's better. It's like similar, like 10 to 10. There should be no outdoor music or talking or anything like that. And I think it's much better for everybody, because the people in Palm Springs code say they hate being called out for like someone being outside talking, and they get there and they're like, this is ridiculous. It's a nuisance for codes as well. So I do think like set hours maybe would be more effective than no outside music, no talking outside, which is very restrictive.
However, I think the city in the city's guidance on how to construct something from a noise abatement procedure, I'd encourage the city to look at conceptually, if I go down to my property with my family for a weekend and we're out barbecuing and playing music, that's normal and reasonable. And as long as we stay within what is normal and reasonable, I think it'll as well as hold up in court, I think it'll also make the neighbors realize, hey, they're overdoing it, they're not. And then the city is going to have to be the arbitrator of who is a chronic complainer and go out there and write the citations. I think, unfortunately, the city is going to have to make sure you do write citations when they're merited so we can look at data. Because if it's all hearsay and innuendo, this will be a nightmare.
So speaking of, noise is a great topic because I think it's one of the more challenging measurements that we, we'll have to struggle with as a commission and as a city to find that the right spot so that we don't create a nuisance for the code enforcement team, but we do create enough of a framework around noise that in the event of a bad actor, they're easy to deal with. And some of the conversations I had in the past, this committee and even planning commission meetings, is hear from people when you're doing a good job. And so that's sort of the downside, is most of the focus is on the complaining, the past. And, one of the things we're working hard to do is put regulations in place that give Jeff and his team the ability to actually go out and deal with the bad actors so that the doing it right can continue to operate, at least with this that we're talking about. So I'm curious, do any of you have noise monitors in any of your units? And is that something that anybody would be willing to, discuss?
I think that's what I was going to bring up. The noise monitor clearly is a way of getting that data. I do not put them in my units initially because I'm a little concerned with how anybody would feel. Frankly, I have Alexas in my units that turn lights on and off, and they're always unplugged because people are a little nervous about that. But I think maybe talking to the noise monitor companies, even if the city were to talk to them, they've got some real metrics and statistics that could be of value. And then maybe one of us puts one in for 6 months just to see how it works and what it really does. But I would assume there'd be a tremendous amount of data from those companies.
Yeah, Airbnb has a whole host of, I think they have 3 different units that they recommend if you go on their website, in the hosting section, if I recall. They do offer a disc. I would assume they're discounted, but various units that don't record noise, they just monitor it and report it, but you can't hear anything. And I'm assuming that with those, there's some handouts that you could hand to your guests and explain what it is. It literally looks like a little box on a wall, and I don't think most people would even know what it was, but it sounds like nobody has actually installed one of those. Tiffany, you have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I put them in my Nashville properties because there's a lot of bachelorette and bachelor parties. And even though they almost never come out for noise complaints there, I want to be a good neighbor to my neighbors. And so I did install them in my Nashville property. You do have to actually disclose them on Airbnb. There's like a little, usually the company that you get the monitor from, they give you this verbiage that you have to post in your VRBO Airbnb listing that says noise is being monitored but not recorded, that sort of stuff. And they did work, but I got a lot of very false warnings too, where I would get this warning like, oh, excessive music for 15 minutes or sounds. And I would send the property manager out and they're like, I can't even hear it at all. And it was still giving me the warnings. So I did uninstall them, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea. But that was probably like a year and a half ago, and I had them for about 6 months. And I think it's probably, they may have figured out a way to like work out some of those kinks now.
Great. Well, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got noise, we've got trash. Is there any, before we just go into some more questions that might happen, Commissioner Donor may have, or anybody else. Is there any other particular item that has been discussed so far that you want to continue to give us some input on or feedback? And I saw Dina, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I have two. One, I think that, you know, I'm sort of in the middle ground in terms of short-term rentals. I am a homeowner who isn't excited to have them next door to me. And I'm a short-term renter person so I'm extremely vigilant about who I rent to and how long they stay. And I want people that are quiet and that have dogs and don't disrupt the community, that add to the community. So and this is controversial, I know, again, you know, with some of my colleagues that are on the short-term rental side, but you know, I know with Rancho Mirage, one of the proposals that we put across the table to the city council was minimum stays. That, you know, gets some investment from the people that are staying there, that they're not going to be partiers if they're there for a certain length of time. And then the other part that we had proposed at Rancho Mirage before they voted was really step up enforcement, you know, get more people on the enforcement side so that the residents who are against short-term rentals have some peace of mind that if they do call the helpline or the hotline, that somebody's actually going to be able to go out and make an investigation and make a determination.
Thank you. And that's really what we're talking about today, is how do we arm our staff with, you know, regulations that actually have meaning and depth and some teeth, so that when we do get the bad actors, that we're able to deal with them quickly and not have the situation perpetuated to the point that it becomes a bigger issue than it needs to be.
I would also just harp on the concept that you've had 4 citations written in a 12-month period. That's it. You know, is there a problem that we need to define? 4 citations, I think we need to key in on that. That's a pretty important lead. That's a pretty low number. So if it's an outlying number that it's really not 4, because we're not writing enough citations that should be written, then we need to write more if it's warranted. Otherwise, we have bad data.
I would just like to play devil's advocate, and that when I had this unruly neighbor, he was calling the helpline or the hotline a lot. I only received a call twice on 2 occasions when he had called in probably 10 times. And I received those calls and they were in the middle of the night, and it was just a voicemail. There was nothing, no number for me to call, nobody for me to talk to. Nobody came out to check on his concerns. So that was my experience, was that frankly, the enforcement wasn't there.
I second that, because I think that there are many areas in Dana Point. It seems to me a much quieter, tamer city for much of it than other beach cities. So I think maybe 4, hopefully it's all we need. I don't know. But I agree we should look at it. But I think it's a pretty quiet city.
If I may add, I thought it was only on 2 properties. There were 144 only complaints about 2 properties. So 142 of us have no complaints at all. So it's pretty isolated, it would appear, again, subject to our, you know, is the enforcement adequate enough? And that's will be the question. It would appear to be.
So Jeff, is it true it's only 2 units, or was it 2 actual citations, but we've received more than, you know, a few calls?
Yeah, so we received 28 nuisance complaints. And I'd have to look back, but it's probably on 10 or 11 properties.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood. Sorry.
But we only verified that there was an actual problem at 2 of the locations. The other one, such as Deanna Slocum's neighbor, he always called in anonymous, so we couldn't follow up with him. It was rather difficult. But our code officer would go out, he'd talk to the neighbors, and he'd figure, you know, it was often for a barking dog. I don't know how many calls he called in to complain about a barking dog, maybe like 14 times he called the complaint line for that. But it's really hard when
those were his dogs that were barking, actually. He was trying to throw us off his dogs because the neighbors were complaining about his dogs. So he wanted to put it as my people had dogs and were complaining. So anyway.
We give him a citation and bust him.
Yeah.
We actually ended up taking him to court. That's why he moved. But I would say, you know, and I'm glad to know that people came out and investigated, but I never had any interaction with the enforcement people. And so I hear these anti-short-term rental people saying, you know, there's no, you know, we call in the middle of the night and nobody comes out. And that's been my experience too. So I just want to put that out there that, it, you know, to calm that other side's objections, if we were to say, hey, we've got enforcement working from these hours, you know, 24/7, we've got somebody that will absolutely investigate, I think that would give a lot of people comfort.
And I don't know if this has been mentioned, but in a lot of cities, they require a 24/7 person, you know, that's local anyways, that they have to be able to be reached. So if there is an issue and say, you know, I'm not at my Dana Point place, I'm back in my Rancho Cucamonga place, like I can message them and say, you need to go over there right now. And I think a lot of cities that require that have less issues.
That's a really good point. I mean, I'm 5 minutes from my property, except when I'm here in Rancho Mirage, but I'm 5 minutes from my Dana Point property. And I think that there should be somebody absolutely that can respond within 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So Jeff, I know that you touched on this at one point, but I can't recall exactly what you said. What is our current hours of enforcement?
So code enforcement is in the office, you know, regular business hours for city staff. The hotline is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You do talk to a live person when you call into the hotline. There is a little bit of a disconnect about how that hotline information, that complaint then gets to us. And so it usually gets emailed to us. And so if we're not in the office, we're not monitoring our email, then, you know, we follow up on it the next day. The 4 citations that were written this year for noise were all written after the fact, right? So they called the complaint line, they took down the complaint, we got notified, but they also called the sheriff's department, because if it's after hours, it's super important that they call the sheriff's department. And so the sheriff's department will head out there and they will file a report, and code enforcement will check on that report. They'll talk to the deputy and be like, hey, you think, as William was saying, Bill was saying, you know, was it a reasonable, you know, level of noise? And a lot of times we'll get complaints for people doing exactly what Bill was saying. They were having a barbecue, looking at the ocean, enjoying the evening. But sometimes it was an unreasonable level of noise, and so we wrote those 4 citations this year.
What is the law for the sheriff's department? What is the sheriff's guidance? What's the sheriff's rule book say for noise? I mean, anyone can call it a noise complaint. I always had heard that at past 11 o'clock, you can get a sheriff who will write you a ticket, but I don't know if that's true or not. Do we know what reality is?
It is true, and if it's unreasonable, they'll you know, write a ticket. Most of the time, they just ask you to go in and knock it off. And you know, your renters in Dana Point are pretty nice, and for the most part, they'll go in and shut the doors, and we won't have an issue. We don't have, you know, giant party houses like some other municipalities have. But I was gonna say, this past summer we did step up and have code enforcement during high impact times. So we had them on Friday, Saturday, even occasionally during the week in the later hours. So maybe from 5 till after quiet time at 10 or 11. And so we were able to head out and hit, you know, one of the homes that we received several complaints at. We were able to, you know, be there at 10 and make sure that they were quiet and make sure that the guests knew that they were in a quiet neighborhood and they needed to be respectful. And I think that was effective, having code staff out on the weekends and nights. And we hadn't done that prior to this past summer. Just having the trucks out there on Beach Road or headed up to Corniche and checking in with the security guards up there. I think it was effective. And I think that was something we'd like to continue to do moving forward.
Thank you. Any other thoughts that anybody else wanted to share before we get into a few questions and answers?
Eric, I had something that I think Tiffany and Deanna had mentioned, and just wanted to get their thoughts as well as everyone else's in terms of you guys mentioned, a vetting process when you do get potential guests, and wanted to see if there was anything in your vetting process that you think would be valuable for the city to look at or possibly incorporate it into our municipal code in terms of some additional regulations. I don't know if it directly transfers over, but if there's any insight that you guys have that would be beneficial, that would be much appreciated. And that would be for everyone here.
I think what would be beneficial is to give both the tenant the opportunity to behave and give the property owner the opportunity to get good tenants. And by that, what I mean by that is contractually, when I write up an agreement, whether it be through VRBO or Airbnb, I will always state that your pricing is based on 4 people, 2 adults, 2 kids, and no more. And there are no parties allowed. And maybe for the city to ask all the STRs to have a standardized piece of verbiage that says your unit is permitted for no more than 4 to 5 people. And you need to have this disclaimer or this on your contract or some of your correspondence, because then I would say it also gives the renter the opportunity that when Uncle Joe is going to come for a drop-in visit because the family is renting in Dana Point, the family has the opportunity to tell Uncle Joe, sorry, you can't come because the city says we can only have 4 or 5 people on site. So it gives everybody the good hard excuse to talk about contractually, I can't do this. Or as I tell people, I am not going to risk my permit with the city of Dana Point because you're going to break the rules.
I know the desert cities make a standardized form that every guest has to sign at check-in. I also send out at 24 hours after they've booked, I send out a thing with my rules and I say, this is quiet. There's no music allowed. These are the hours of talking. These are daytime guests, nighttime guests. If you go over this, you forfeit your reservation and your money. And I say, it's not that I'm trying to be tough. It's just that those are the city rules. And then I make them reply like, I understand, so that I have it documented. And I've never had a complaint in a single rental ever. So I think doing things like that are probably helpful.
Tiffany, what about in the desert cities? I think they do minimum ages.
Yes. Yep. 25 years old or older.
And I think at Rancho Mirage, we actually, again, we were fighting for the permit, right? But we actually offered the city council that we would do 30. So I know in my case, I don't rent to anybody, under 40, frankly. I mean, most of my renters are established professionals. And now I'm pretty much doing 3 to 4 weeks. I don't even do less than, less than 2 weeks is not even, it doesn't make any sense for me. So.
Well, that's a checkoff box for both Airbnb and VRBO is what is your age requirement?
And they require IDs. They require you to get their license, their right, have a record of their driver's license information.
So they know the age. So if you say, I don't want to rent to anyone less than 26, they don't get them.
I think it's easier though when there's a city rule, and I'll tell you why. Airbnb is constantly like, that's discrimination if you say I don't want to rent under a certain age. But if the city says you can't rent under a certain age, it's not discrimination. So I actually like when the cities have like 25 and up, because then it's not discrimination. I can check that box and I'm legal.
Yeah.
I was also going to ask if you guys are thinking about different types of rules for hosted rentals versus non-hosted rentals. So for those people who are owners and they live on site of their rental, would there be a more lax, the rental market is different, obviously, in that we being the host is the owner and living there, they have much more scrutiny and oversight. I wasn't sure if there's a bifurcation of the types of rentals and the rules that would apply.
Well, I think that'd be confusing.
I don't think we've developed the regulations in that manner yet, but that is a good point.
So let me
And the
ask.
only reason I the only reason I suggested is because the survey had a very distinct difference between those types of rentals. But I don't know how many hosted rentals there really are other than George. I think you're probably one of the only ones.
Yeah,
hosted
I'm
rentals.
right here, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I wondered if even under our own definition, if you're not inside the unit, it's considered a hosted or non-hosted. And maybe that's something we need to make sure we're clear on, because if you're in a duplex where you're not in the unit, have the whole unit to themselves. At least if you're an Airbnb host, that would show up as a whole house rental on a duplex. You're renting out the duplex. But I think worthy of a discussion, all of us, and certainly for the team on, how the structured, and not to make it confusing, because I think that again could be a problem if they don't make sense or they're not easily understood. I am curious to hear from anybody that any of you actually is, as hosts, and I'll preface it with, I have an Airbnb that I have in another city. It's not a short-term, more long-term, 30 plus days due to the city's regulations. But I before I ever put it on Airbnb, I reached out to all my neighbors who would be potentially, gave them my information, encouraged them to call me immediately if there was a problem. And, I have had multiple calls with a few guests doing things that were questionable. And so sort of into my question to you all is, how many of you know your neighbor? And how many of you have reached out to them, provide your information so that they could contact sort of the good neighbor policy? And I'm asking this more out of curiosity than anything else.
My neighbors and I are very, very close. We, except we actually banded together for that person that was a problem. So they always are, they didn't even realize I was doing short-term rentals until this guy came up with his issues. So they're very on it. They let me know if there's any sort of issue that they want to bring forward.
Yeah, I think that for the people that have been doing this for a while, we do know all our neighbors. We want to keep our neighbors happy, because I personally spend a lot of time in my units in the summer. I live there as much as I can. If they're not rented, I'm there. So they all have my phone number, and it would be an embarrassment to me if there were ever an issue. I would think that's really the majority of most of the owners feel. We want to be good neighbors because we show up there quite a bit.
Yeah,
I've
I'm
had-
quite a bit when I'm renting it. And my neighbors enjoy meeting. We get people from all over the world, and they form friendships. So I had one bad egg in 13 years, and we asked them to leave right away. So I feel really fortunate.
I've
So
asked
maybe it would be good counsel if when the neighbors come to have the meeting with the city, that the city asks the neighbors, hey, do you know who owns your short-term rental? Do you have their home phone number? Do you have their cell phone number? And if you don't, maybe we in the city can help facilitate you getting that. I certainly don't think most of the short-term rental owners would have any problem if they haven't already given their neighbors their phone number. And then the onus is on the neighbor that if there really is a genuine problem, call the owner. I know my neighbors would. And I think that takes it off the back of code enforcement to go out for hearsay and innuendo of something went wrong and it's an anonymous tip and all that nonsense.
I've asked two of my neighbors to call me, given them my phone number. I've never received any calls from them in the last 3 or 4 years. But I do have other neighbors I could ask. So that's my story.
What about any of you, or could you share with me the management side of your Airbnb? Are you all self-managing, or do you have a management company?
So
I self-manage. I think a lot of us do it. We don't do it just for fun, but it's an awful lot of fun. I meet a lot of really nice people, and it's a fun thing. And I would, it's a shame to hear that it gets out of hand.
Yeah, we self-manage as well.
I self-manage.
Anybody use a management company? Doesn't sound like it.
Too much of a control freak, and I want to make sure I know who's going to be in my home for sure.
Yeah, very often we meet our guests too. I mean, you know, if I wasn't there like I am now, I live very close, and you know, if they want to meet, we meet, and you know, if there's trouble, you know, I'm there within 10 minutes. So it's not been an
Good.
issue.
Yeah, I think that's a great note. I mean, there are relationships. We have people repeat every year, become friends. We think we provide a great service. I mean, we operate, 2 of our places have yards all fenced in. So we have dogs and kids that aren't as comfortable, can't bring their dogs necessarily into hotels, or certainly, it's an interesting personal relationship that we have as well.
Mhm.
And we think we become good ambassadors for the city of Dana Point.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, for example, I've just now invested in putting paddle boards in my property because we have this beautiful harbor that's walking distance. And that's what the people that stay there want to be active and they want to enjoy that. And that's not something that they could normally do at a hotel. Plus, I really focus on people with dogs. I love when people travel with their dogs. And I find that type of renter is usually a very quiet person when he wants to walk through the community with their dog. And so it works out quite well.
Yeah.
I do the same. We have a big yard. So, and like I said, I've had one bad experience and they left the next morning. I mean, but most people that travel with their dogs are like their children. I mean, they're like their children, and they take very good care of the property. I've had better luck with dogs on the property than people.
Yeah, I can echo that as well.
I am curious, Airbnb has been around for that long, and so it's, platforms exposed people that have, historically had vacation homes. I think of Beach Road as a prime example. Beach Road is somewhere where, multi-generations have visited over the years. And at one point you would go down to the local real estate office and pick up a set of keys. But so how you operated independent of a hosted platform and either used like a third-party realtor or Craigslist or some technology, but prior to these bigger platforms?
We only use VRBO, never tried Airbnb. So, and that's just to advertise, not to rent out and manage.
Yeah, VRBO, when I started, it was very simple and it was all owner, took care of everything. They've changed their model a lot over the last, probably 10 years or so. And there's all sorts of, things you need to do to get placement and, all that. It was always like on seniority for a long time. And everything was left up to the owner to manage as far as payments and, all that stuff. But it's changed a bit on those sites.
But I would also say, while Airbnb is relatively young or new, VRBO has been around since the late 90s. So most of us I've been using VRBO for travel, for my own travel for over 20 years. And then just keep in mind, as we all know, before any of these sites, I know my parents used to use the Penny Saver for their property in Laguna Beach. And we had several instances where my father would have to drive in the middle of the night because the renters that he didn't know had set the curtains on fire in the home. And so that's Penny Saver for you. I would much rather do what we're doing now, which is we have a lot of opportunities to vet who we rent to. And I can look at their ratings. I can Google them and look at their Facebook accounts. I can see that if they're partiers or not. There's a lot of ways that we can now verify who's going to be coming into our homes.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know from the other owners. I've been doing this for quite a while in Dana Point when only VRBO was around. My business has moved from VRBO. It was 100% VRBO 10, 15 years ago. it's about 90% Airbnb today. Does anyone else experience that? Do you do multi-platforms?
I'm the opposite. I'm 90, and I honestly, I find VRBO people more mature, more responsible. Airbnb tend to be a little more casual and less conscientious for me.
What I find though from Airbnb is Airbnb gives a very complete review of your guest, so that you could really understand who's coming. And I don't see that. You can't see reviews from VRBO. So Airbnb really gives you the opportunity to read subsequent reviews, where I know we've all had that issue of, geez, I hope this is a good tenant. I hope they're telling me what they're telling me is true. When you read 5 or 10 glowing reviews, you stand at ease and are rested. So that's been my experience.
That's true, because I just accepted a booking from somebody that stayed with George, and it's because her review was so glowing from George's wife. But yes, you're right. Airbnb has a better review system, and VRBO hides the reviews to owners until you accept the booking, which is a little sketchy.
So we've got about 15 minutes left. I did want to just make sure, Commissioner Donor, if you had any questions or anything you wanted to toss out there, we don't miss your opportunity to do that.
The only thing that I would like to get a consensus on is, it seems like everybody's in agreement that being a good neighbor is beneficial to every renter and every owner. And the response time is probably the key issue for people that are concerned about rentals. So if the ownership is available and willing to give their numbers, then that shortcuts the city's involvement, number one. And if the time frame of some local response is something that everyone agrees on, I think that's something that we could consider incorporating into our regulations. And I'd just like to thank everyone for their participation today. It's been very educational for all of us.
Yeah, to that point, now that I think about it, the Rancho Mirage permit requirement was that the person had to be within 20 minutes of the property. So you could not apply for a permit unless you designated a person that was within 20 minutes of the property. I'd say cut it down to 10.
I think as you talk to people in the city of Dana Point that are either for or against having their neighbors with short-term rentals, I think to allay their fears, to tell them that if they have a concern, either get the phone number of the owner or don't be shy about calling the owner even before you call the city. And that will take also a burden off the city, because we don't want to burden the city with this. Because maybe if they have to call the owner or should call the owner first, it won't be just a spurious complaint.
I guess one other thing too that maybe we could let the general public know is at least there's more control over short-term rentals. I had a house in Redlands. It's a small town in Redlands. It was my husband's house. And when we got married, we bought a different house and we had a long-term rental, and he was awful. Like, we got complaints about him all the time, and there was almost nothing I could do because there was minimal regulation and, rental laws and not kicking him out. And so I've never gotten a complaint about any short-term renters, but I got complaints all the time about my long-term renter. And
where are the rules for long-term rent?
I know.
Yeah.
Parking, trash.
Yeah, I can echo that completely about the parties. I can go on and on and on. And, that I've had so much a better quality of life with my rentals, because I've been living here for a while, with short-term rentals compared to long-term rentals.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, because we have more control as owners.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be a bad neighbor, and we don't want to live next to, that nightmare tenant.
Plus, short-term renters leave.
Exactly. That's what I tell people. I go, look, you may not like them, but they're leaving in a couple days. if you're stuck with like Deanna, you know, you had an issue there, that's a whole nother.
I personally have been.
Well, he moved this weekend. It's three years of a nightmare have now come to a close.
Well, those are good comments about short term, because as renters, we all know that if you get a review or something that somebody says, my stay wasn't so great because it's a loud place, or any comments like that, we have incentive to make sure that things are under control. Whereas I suppose that you could argue that permanent residents don't have that incentive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've had my bigger problems with some of the adjoining neighbors, and quite frankly, a sober living home that has disturbed I'm afraid we're going to get bad reviews because of them, frankly. So, those have been some of the issues that have affected us. And, I'm in a rental community, so I have apartments on one side and one sober living home right behind me now. I've had it forever, but so you're right. Noise is a problem that transcends short-term rentals. It transcends the whole community.
I also think it's good to point out too, maybe to the community, that generally speaking, short-term rental owners keep their properties up like impeccably because of the reviews. And again, long-term renters, or a lot of times don't. So a lot of times the community is more beautiful when they're short-term rentals, because they keep up their houses. They know they're going to be reviewed, and in turn that's good for the property owner because it's increasing their property value and their neighborhood value altogether as well. So I think those are things we need to let the community think about as well.
Well, and I think there's just an opportunity here, as you guys are doing this, to really kind of fight with facts, right? I mean, you've got the number of citations, you've got the number of calls. I'm on social media all the time on the next doors and trying to show the survey results. When we have the Tony Nelsons out there and the Buck and Betty Hills complaining about short-term rentals, we've countered that with the facts, which is there have been 2 citations issued during this period of time for 140 such properties. I mean, that's just crazy. Those are crazy small numbers. And so the counter argument on their side is, well, it's because law enforcement doesn't come out. So if we have an argument that says, no, actually we have law enforcement that works 24/7, especially during these periods, then, people start to calm down. But it's that misinformation, the fake news issue, that's really what's creating this problem, I think.
To address that, we've really bolstered our website. Jeff took the lead in adding some of the code enforcement data to our website, and he's going to be doing an update of that on a regular basis. Because you're right, it's just a matter of trying to put out the information so everyone sees the raw data. On top of that, there's some educational tools that he's developed, ones like how to be a good neighbor. So if you guys wanted to print out the flyer for your guests and have it in there, or if you're a resident that has a short-term rental next to you, what should I do? Call the sheriff's department if you have an issue with the noise, or contact the property owner. So those are the kind of things that are new initiatives that we're taking to try to, like you said, try to get the right information out there, and also give people the right tools to help us do a better job of enforcement. So that's more to come on all that stuff. You mentioned the city of Palm Springs, Tiffany. We've been looking at them a lot because, they have done a lot of good stuff that we've been drawing upon. Their website is one that we have gleaned from tremendously.
Yeah, I think it's been successful there from what I've seen. I mean, all the neighbors our neighbors, everyone around us is a long-term renter at our house in Palm Springs, and they all, whenever we visit, which is, we try to go as often as possible, they come out and say like, oh, we love how your gardening's always kept up and this, and like the renter there before was awful. So that's where I got this information. So I was like, oh, this is true. We are good for the neighborhood.
Well, I do want to encourage you all. Thank you again for your time tonight. We're getting close to 5:30, and I want to make sure, that we let you know how much we appreciate all the feedback tonight. I think Commissioner Donor said it really well. A lot of good information was shared. I would encourage all to not only visit, the website to get more information as we move through this process, but show up or get online for the public hearings, because testimony is going to be important for all the other people that aren't participating in this and may not take the time to, watch any of the other stakeholder meetings or review any of those notes. And what's important is to hear all the ones that like short-term rentals, the ones that don't like them, the ones that aren't sure, because the collective voice is an important one. It's, what we're about, and what we're really trying to do here is get feedback from all different sides, but then also make sure that that feedback and the people that share that show up to our meetings as well and share that with the rest of the commission. But we have 5 minutes left. If anybody has any closing ideas or things that we didn't talk about, feel free.
All right, I have a quick question. What is the best way to know about when these meetings are coming up or when we should be joining? Because I follow some of the social media pages, but I don't always see the meetings coming up, I guess. I'm not sure where to go for the information.
John, is it best for her to email you at the short-term rental email address?
Yeah, you can email the short-term rental address. I think, like we said, our next meeting will be on February, is it 22nd? So that will be the absolute next list, our next meeting, as well as you're all on our interested parties list. So as meetings come up, you'll be notified, and that's of all. We have a large interested parties list. It's not only the stakeholders that we've reached out to, so everyone will be made note of, when that meeting is coming.
So we'll keep an eye out for your emails for the stuff that's happening. And the time frame for this is really over this next year. We're going to have a workshop in February talking about the regulations. Then we'll be kicking off the development of the pilot program in the spring. So we'll invite you back to have another discussion. And then it requires planning commission public hearings, and then ultimately to the city council. So it's a slow burn. We want to make sure that we're taking the time to hear from everybody in the community and developing thoughtful regulations that make sense, and really trying to make it clear too to the community what we're trying to accomplish. The two-phase approach: regulations, then the pilot program. So trying to keep the conversations separate so we can accomplish each step. It's been such a long toll trying to come up with some kind of program that works. I'm confident this time around we'll hopefully come up with something.
So is it correct to say that there won't be people who currently do not have permits but want one, they will not be allowed to apply until the final ordinance is approved by the city council? Or is it part of the pilot program that you would open it up to new people who want to do short-term rentals?
Potentially, if the decision is for the pilot program to include new permits, people could obtain new permits during the pilot program.
And Brenda mentioned it, that's really the second phase of this process is, what is the pilot program? Is it just the existing permits? Is it scaling back? Is it scaling up? We are not in a position to take, I'm certainly not in a place where I could recommend any appropriate step there. What we really need to do is get our house in order first. And that's what this first phase is making sure our regulations work, making sure that they're appropriate so that whatever program we end up with has a regulatory scheme that works and ensures that some of the concerns that we know are out there can be addressed. Well, again, thank you all very much for your time tonight and today, and really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you on the 22nd.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Take care, everybody.